Night had always belonged to Japanese scouts. For years they had mastered it. They moved silently through jungle and broken terrain, slipping past sentries, mapping enemy positions, cutting phone lines, and returning before dawn without leaving a trace. Darkness was not a limitation to them. It was a weapon. American units learned quickly that if they relaxed after sunset, the Japanese would already be among them. By 1943, this reality had hardened into doctrine. American soldiers dug in tight at night, patrols were limited, movement was discouraged, everyone waited for dawn. That expectation was exactly what one American captain decided to destroy. He did not have superior numbers. He did not have better terrain. He did not have advanced technology. What he had was an understanding of psychology and a willingness to break every rule of night fighting. The captain had spent weeks watching Japanese scout behavior, not in combat but in the aftermath. He read patrol reports. He studied captured maps. He listened to exhausted infantrymen describe the same pattern again and again. The Japanese never attacked randomly at night. They probed. They tested. They confirmed. Scouts went first, always. They approached American positions quietly, sometimes crawling for hours, counting sentries, identifying noise discipline, locating machine gun nests and command posts. Only after scouts confirmed weakness would the real attack come. The captain realized something critical. If the scouts could be misled, the attack would collapse before it ever began. The idea that followed was simple and completely insane by existing standards. Instead of waiting for Japanese scouts at night, he would go looking for them. Not with patrols, not with ambushes, but with fake units. He called it a reverse night raid. The concept violated everything American doctrine taught. Moving deliberately at night was considered dangerous. Creating noise was considered suicidal. Revealing presence was supposed to invite disaster. But the captain understood something deeper. Japanese scouts expected Americans to be passive at night. They expected silence. They expected stillness. They expected defense. If they encountered movement, they assumed it was a weak patrol or a confused unit. If they encountered multiple moving elements, they assumed it was a large force. That assumption would be used against them. The first test came on a moonless night along a jungle ridgeline. The American company had been harassed repeatedly for nights in a row. Grenades thrown into perimeter trenches, snipers firing once then disappearing, wire cut, men exhausted from lack of sleep. Morale was dropping fast. The captain gathered a small group of volunteers, men who understood exactly what he was about to attempt. He explained the plan once, calmly, clearly. They would leave the perimeter after dark. They would move toward the Japanese approach routes. They would deliberately make noise, controlled specific noise. They would simulate multiple platoons where only squads existed. They would not attack. They would not pursue. They would withdraw on schedule every time. The men stared at him in disbelief. One sergeant finally said what everyone was thinking. "Sir, that sounds like bait." The captain nodded. "That's exactly what it is." At 2300 hours, the first reverse raid began. 3 small teams slipped into the jungle, not silently but noticeably. Boots brushed foliage. Canteens tapped against gear. A shovel scraped rock once deliberately. A low voice spoke just loud enough to carry. To Japanese ears trained to detect subtle patterns, This was unmistakable. American movement. But it didn't sound like panic. It didn't sound like confusion. It sounded like organized patrols. The Japanese scouts took the bait instantly. They shadowed the Americans, convinced they were observing forward elements from a larger force. They marked positions, they counted footsteps, they followed movement that seemed to split, regroup, then split again. What they did not realize was that the same Americans were looping back, creating overlapping movement signatures that suggested dozens of men. The jungle began to lie. One Japanese scout team reported seeing Americans moving in two directions at once. Another reported hearing a command voice farther back that didn't exist. A third believed an American platoon had crossed their withdrawal route. A confusion set in quickly. The Americans withdrew exactly as planned, vanishing before contact. No shots fired, no engagement. To the Japanese, this was unsettling. American units did not normally move like this at night. The next night, the captain repeated the raid. Same pattern, same timing, same controlled noise. But this time, he added something new. Decoy fires. Small, brief flashes from covered lighters, just enough to suggest cigarette embers. A helmet deliberately knocked against a tree, a low cough. Japanese scouts watched, certain now that American units were maneuvering aggressively in the darkness. They reported this up the chain. The reports were wrong but consistent. American forces appeared to be operating outside their perimeter at night. American units appeared to be hunting. American patrols seemed numerous, overlapping, unpredictable. The Japanese command did not know what to make of it. The third night was when the trap fully closed. The captain introduced a final element. False contact. One team fired a single rifle shot, not at the Japanese, but into open jungle. Another team answered with a distant shout, intentionally vague, then silence. Japanese scouts reacted exactly as expected. They assumed an American unit had stumbled into something, perhaps another patrol, perhaps friendly fire confusion. Scouts advanced rapidly to investigate, and walked directly into nothing. No Americans. No unit. No position. But now the jungle itself seemed hostile. Japanese scouts began firing at shadows. They reported being followed. Some claimed Americans were maneuvering behind them, even though no one was there. One scout later admitted he believed the Americans were using invisible units. By the fifth night, Japanese night activity collapsed. Scouts stopped probing forward. Patrols pulled back. Attacks planned for dawn were cancelled. Japanese units began wasting ammunition firing at phantom movement. Some even attacked their own forward elements, convinced Americans had infiltrated their lines. The captain watched the results quietly. He never claimed credit. He never filed reports calling it revolutionary. He simply repeated the raids night after night until the psychological damage was complete. Japanese scouts no longer trusted the darkness. Worse, they no longer trusted each other. The breaking point came when a Japanese scouting party attacked what they believed was an American forward unit moving through a ravine. It was actually another Japanese unit conducting a routine reposition. The firefight was brief, violent, and devastating. After that night, Japanese commanders restricted night scouting severely. Some units ceased it altogether. The Americans, meanwhile, slept. For the first time in weeks, no grenades fell into trenches, no wire was cut, no snipers fired from the darkness. The night had changed hands. Not through firepower, not through technology, but through deception so subtle it made the enemy fight ghosts. And the captain realized something terrifyingly powerful. If scouts could be broken, entire armies could be blinded. By the third night after the first reverse raid, Japanese scout activity intensified instead of diminishing. From the American perspective, it looked like the enemy was becoming reckless. Patrols moved faster. Signal flares appeared where none had before. Shots were fired at shadows that did not move. The jungle, once silent and disciplined, had become restless. That was exactly what the captain wanted. Japanese doctrine placed enormous emphasis on night reconnaissance. Scouts were not meant to fight. They were meant to observe, mark positions, count men, and withdraw unseen. Information gathered at night shaped artillery fire, infiltration routes, and dawn assaults. When that system worked, Japanese units could strike with terrifying precision. But the reverse night raid attacked the system itself. The captain understood something most officers did not. Japanese scouts trusted patterns more than confirmations. If they saw movement where movement should be, they assumed it was real. If they heard sounds that matched expectations, they logged them without verification. They did not linger. They did not probe deeply. Speed and invisibility were their protection. So the Americans gave them exactly what they expected to see. On the fourth night, American engineers quietly assembled a false bivouac on a narrow ridge. No men slept there, no command post existed, but helmets were hung on branches at human height. Empty ration tins were crushed and scattered near shallow foxholes. Cigarette smoke was simulated using small smoldering rags placed behind rocks, carefully shielded so the glow could not be seen directly. A single radio operator transmitted short, meaningless bursts from the position, never long enough to be triangulated, but frequent enough to be logged. Then the entire area was abandoned. Japanese scouts observed the ridge from the trees. They counted shadows. They noted sounds. They saw helmet silhouettes. They smelled smoke. They heard faint radio chatter. Every indicator matched a lightly defended American forward position. They withdrew without ever approaching close enough to realize no one was there. Before dawn, Japanese artillery began adjusting fire toward the ridge. The shells fell exactly where the Americans wanted them to fall. The real American positions were hundreds of meters away, already relocated hours earlier. The ridge burned uselessly. For the Japanese commanders reviewing the reports, everything appeared correct. Scouts had done their job, artillery had responded. Yet when daylight came, no American bodies were found, no equipment was recovered, no captured prisoners confirmed the destruction. At first, this was chalked up to poor visibility or enemy movement, but then it happened again. And again. Within a week, Japanese artillery logs showed a disturbing trend. Fire missions were being conducted against positions that vanished before dawn. Every shell landed where Americans had been reported, but never where they actually were. Japanese scouts began to question themselves. On the fifth night, a Japanese scout team moved deeper than usual, determined to verify what they were seeing. They crept toward a clearing where they believed an American platoon was resting. They could hear movement, boots on dirt, low voices, metal clinking softly. It sounded exactly like men preparing to sleep. As they approached, one scout noticed something wrong. The sounds did not change. They repeated perfectly. Footsteps that never shifted position. Voices that never altered tone. Metal sounds that repeated every 30 seconds. It was not human. The scout froze, his breathing slowed. His instinct screamed danger, not from Americans, but from something unnatural. He signaled retreat. As the scouts pulled back, the sound stopped instantly. The clearing went dead silent. No pursuit. No challenge. No reaction. That silence terrified them more than gunfire ever could. Back at their command post, the scout leader reported what he had experienced. His officer listened in silence, then dismissed the account. Stress, fatigue, nerves. The report was filed and forgotten. But the doubt remained. The Americans expanded the deception. They began conducting false retreats at night. Units deliberately left tracks leading away from phantom camps. Dragged branches created signs of hurried withdrawal. Empty shell casings were scattered in shallow arcs suggesting brief firefights. Japanese scouts followed the trails eagerly. They led nowhere. Worse, some trails looped back toward Japanese lines, creating the illusion of infiltration. Japanese units redeployed defensively, pulling forces away from real American concentrations to protect against attacks that never came. The captain watched the effect grow night by night. Japanese scouts were no longer confident observers. They had become participants in an illusion. One night, American troops quietly placed wooden silhouettes along a jungle edge, rough human shapes carved hastily, just tall enough to cast recognizable outlines. From a distance, under moonlight filtered through leaves, they looked real. Japanese scouts reported a battalion forming for attack. No battalion existed. Japanese commanders responded with urgency. Units shifted. Ammunition was redistributed, reserves were repositioned. The American main force advanced elsewhere, completely unopposed. The reverse night raid had turned reconnaissance into a liability. The most damaging effect, however, was psychological. Japanese scouts were trained to trust their senses absolutely. Once that trust was compromised, hesitation crept in. Scouts delayed reports, they double-checked positions, they lingered longer than doctrine allowed, and lingering at night was deadly. American listening posts detected these pauses. On the 8th night, an American ambush caught a Japanese scout team that stayed too long observing a fake encampment. The ambush was swift and silent. No shots were fired. The scouts vanished into the jungle without ever sending a report. Japanese commanders noticed the silence. Scout teams began failing to return. Some were captured, others were killed. A few simply disappeared, swallowed by darkness and confusion. Soon, scouts began traveling in larger groups for safety. This created another problem. Large groups made more noise, they left clearer tracks, they were easier to detect. The captain exploited this immediately. Fake camps were placed deliberately within hearing distance of known Japanese scout routes. The scouts approached cautiously, now fearful of traps. They hesitated, they whispered, they signaled back and forth. American units, already withdrawn, watched from concealed positions. When the scouts finally realized something was wrong, it was too late. Japanese command began receiving conflicting reports. One scout team reported heavy American presence. Another reported nothing at the same coordinates. A third reported movement where artillery had already fired. Maps filled with contradictions. Officers argued. Some insisted the Americans were everywhere. Others insisted the scouts were imagining things. Some believed new American camouflage techniques were involved. Others suspected infiltration units trained to deceive. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. The Americans had inverted the battlefield. Traditionally, Japanese scouts hunted American units. Now American units were hunting Japanese scouts without ever appearing to do so. On the 10th night, the captain escalated the operation. He ordered a reverse raid in full. Instead of waiting for scouts to approach fake camps, American units quietly moved into areas where scouts were known to observe from. They did not attack. They did not reveal themselves. They simply created presence, movement, sound, shape, and then vanished before dawn. Japanese scouts reported American forces appearing behind their own observation lines. This was catastrophic. Commanders feared infiltration. Rear areas were secured. Supply routes were diverted. Units were pulled back to protect against threats that did not exist. Japanese offensive momentum collapsed. In one sector, an entire battalion delayed an attack for 2 days because scouts reported Americans operating inside what should have been secure jungle. No Americans were there by daylight. The delay allowed American artillery to arrive. The attack never happened. The reverse night raid had achieved something extraordinary. It caused Japanese forces to fight an enemy that was not physically present. Even when Americans did engage, Japanese units reacted incorrectly. They attacked empty positions. They shelled false camps. They reinforced phantom threats. Real American movements passed unnoticed. One Japanese officer wrote in his diary, later recovered after the battle. At night we see Americans everywhere. By day they are nowhere. We cannot grasp them. We strike shadows. That sentence captured the collapse perfectly. Japanese scouts began refusing missions. Not openly, not directly, but they volunteered less. They moved slower. They returned sooner. They reported less detail. Fear replaced precision. The captain watched all of this unfold with quiet satisfaction. He had not invented a new weapon. He had not broken enemy lines with force. He had simply reversed expectations. Instead of hiding from scouts, he fed them illusions. Instead of reacting to reconnaissance, he shaped it. Instead of denying information, he poisoned it. By the end of the second week, Japanese night operations were crippled. Scouts no longer trusted what they saw. Commanders no longer trusted scout reports. Units no longer trusted the jungle. And once the jungle stopped being trusted, Japanese tactical identity collapsed with it. On the 15th night, Japanese forces attempted one final countermeasure: aggressive night sweeps intended to flush out American deception teams. Large patrols moved through suspected illusion zones, firing sporadically, shouting challenges, trying to provoke reactions. The Americans gave them none. No response, no shots, no movement. The patrols returned exhausted, confused, and empty-handed. Meanwhile, American units advanced again, this time in daylight, through sectors that should have been heavily defended. They encountered almost no resistance. Japanese forces had withdrawn, convinced night infiltration was underway. The captain's reverse night raid had succeeded beyond expectations. By the time higher command took notice, the effect was irreversible. Japanese scouting doctrine, once one of the most effective tools of jungle warfare, had been turned inward against itself. Scouts no longer revealed the enemy. They created him. The first time Japanese scouts realized something was terribly wrong, It wasn't because of gunfire. It was because the jungle was too active. Branches snapped where no one should have been moving. Whispered voices drifted through the darkness, then vanished. Shapes crossed moonlit clearings, then dissolved back into shadow. Signal flares went up, yet no enemy appeared where they landed. Japanese scouts paused, crouched low, listening. This was not how Americans moved at night. American patrols were supposed to be cautious, slow, defensive after dark. They were supposed to dig in, wait for dawn, protect their perimeter. That was doctrine, that was experience. But now the night felt busy. Crowded. Alive. The captain responsible for this confusion understood exactly why. Instead of defending his perimeter at night, he inverted the entire concept of a night raid. He didn't wait for Japanese scouts to probe American lines. He sent controlled illusions outward, carefully planned movements designed to be seen, half-heard, and misinterpreted. It was not an attack. It was bait. Small American teams moved deliberately, leaving footprints where scouts would find them. They snapped branches intentionally, but never twice in the same place. They lit brief cigarette glows, then extinguished them. They let canteens clink once, then disappeared. Every action was measured. Every sound intentional. Every mistake fake. Japanese scouts trained to hunt stealth began reporting something impossible. American units moving away from their lines at night instead of tightening inward. Commanders assumed this was a large maneuver, perhaps a build-up for a dawn attack. Orders went out to probe aggressively, find the Americans, strike first. That was exactly what the captain wanted. As Japanese scouts advanced, they followed trails that shouldn't exist. Fresh boot prints led into gullies, then vanished. Voices echoed from one ridge, then reappeared far too quickly on another. Fireflies revealed silhouettes that vanished the moment a rifle was raised. The scouts whispered to one another. How many are there? Why do they move like this? Why do they want us to see them? They didn't know they were being pulled. Behind every false trail was a secondary position. Behind every sound was an Overwatch team already relocated. Behind every visible movement was an empty space designed to collapse inward once scouts committed. Japanese patrol leaders began ordering attacks on what they believed were exposed American outposts. Squads moved quickly, confident they had finally caught careless enemy units in the open. They attacked nothing. Grenades landed in empty clearings, rifle fire ripped through abandoned brush, bayonets stabbed into darkness. And then the Americans struck from behind. The reverse night raid did not meet the enemy head-on, it let the enemy run past it. Japanese scouts suddenly found themselves attacked from directions that made no tactical sense. Fire came from the rear, from flanks that had been cleared minutes earlier, from positions they themselves had just occupied. Some scouts believed they were surrounded by multiple American companies. In reality, they were facing a handful of squads rotating positions with precision timing. Confusion spread faster than gunfire. Radio operators transmitted panicked reports. American forces everywhere, units advancing backward, patrols multiplying in the dark, enemy that could not be fixed or counted. Japanese commanders tried to reassert control. They ordered flares, but the flares revealed too much American movement where none should be, shadows where positions had already shifted. The jungle became a hall of mirrors. Scouts began attacking each other by mistake. Units fired toward sounds only to hit friendly patrols that had been redirected by the chaos. Commanders shouted orders that no longer matched reality on the ground. The captain had weaponized anticipation. Every Japanese move was based on expectation, and every expectation was wrong. One Japanese patrol charged what they believed was a retreating American unit. They ran downhill into a shallow ravine. The Americans were already gone. When the patrol reached the ravine floor, machine gun fire erupted from above, behind, and to the side, 3 directions, 1 squad. The survivors fled, convinced they had stumbled into a battalion-sized trap. By the second night, Japanese scouts began refusing to advance without overwhelming force. But overwhelming force only made the illusion stronger. Larger patrols made more noise, revealed more positions, reacted slower. The Americans fed them false movement again and again. Japanese intelligence logs from the period reveal a striking change in language. Early reports spoke of enemy patrols. Later reports spoke of enemy presence. Finally, they spoke of enemy activity without clear location. That phrase terrified commanders. It meant the enemy was no longer something you could point to. It meant the enemy controlled the night. The reverse night raid reached its peak when a full Japanese company was ordered to destroy what command believed was a newly established American forward camp. Scouts had reported lights, movement, and supply noise. The company advanced cautiously. They found cooking fires still warm, footprints everywhere, discarded ration tins. No Americans. As they spread out to search, the jungle exploded, not with volume but with precision, short bursts, close-range fire, sudden silence, then fire again from a different angle. The company broke. Not retreated, broke. Men ran without orders, units collapsed into fragments, officers lost control within minutes. Survivors fled back to their lines, reporting an impossible enemy that attacked only after being abandoned. The captain never pursued. He didn't need to. From that night onward, Japanese scouts hesitated to leave their lines at all. They no longer trusted what they saw. They no longer trusted sound. They no longer trusted absence. The night belonged to the Americans, not because they dominated it with force, but because they rewrote its logic. By the time higher command realized what was happening, the damage was done. Japanese scouting doctrine, once among the most feared in jungle warfare, had collapsed. Scouts were no longer hunters. They were bait. And the most devastating part was this. The Japanese never realized they were fighting the same units over and over again. They believed they were facing ghosts.